Hello, everyone. Good evening. Okay. Um, I'm so excited to welcome all of us to this side event. Um, I am happy that you made out time to join us. Today is a finance day, a very busy day for everybody. In a special way, I thank and commend the panelists, very high profile and very busy experts that made out time to be here. Some of them, somebody like Margaret, I just had to co-opt her into this less than 24 hours ago, and she accepted. I'm sure it's because of her love for NCF. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, every one of you, for joining us. So before we start, like we have seen on the screen, we're going to be looking at scaling up corporate support for convergence actions on nature-positive ambitions in Africa. So a bit of some background to this before I introduce the panelists that are going to lead the discussion today. Africa presents to us the largest restoration opportunity among all continents. With more than 700 million hectares of degraded landscapes that can be restored in Africa, and we can imagine what that is. There are emerging opportunities to help accelerate restoration and biodiversity conservation efforts in Africa. Over the years, many organizations have developed ambitious interventions, activities, and initiatives designed to key into achieving nature-positive status. As we know, one of the key expected outcomes of the many COP events that have been happening over the years is to see how to help drive financial support for these ambitions from government, from private sector, and other stakeholders. But unfortunately, financing has been a major divisive issue, and progress around it has remained very slow. And so this evening, we want to discuss how the private sector and corporate organizations whose businesses most times are negatively affected by the various environmental crises and challenges could scale up their support to nature and biodiversity conservation. And so the discussion will also be pushing for an increased effort and involvement from the private sector, especially through innovative finance for nature-positive ambitions in Africa in the post-2020 GBF. So join me to welcome this great panel that we have this evening. From my immediate left is Martin Harper. He is the Regional Director, Europe and Central Asia, BirdLife International. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Very close to seated to him is Dr. Eugene Itua. He is the CEO of Natural Eco Capital. He is also involved in so many other things, pushing for nature for business, consulting for so many development agencies and organizations like the African Development Bank. and we're happy to have him here today. Welcome. Very close to him is Ndekwa. Let me try to pronounce your surname, Anangwe. Did I get it? Yeah. So she's a senior policy officer at the African Wildlife Foundation, and she's also a PhD student on biodiversity and investment at the University of Kenya. We're happy to have you here. Close to her is Dr. Joseph Onoja, the Director General of Nigerian Conservation Foundation. And then we have Margaret Kulo from WWF, the Global Finance Practice Leader of WWF International. Welcome, Margaret. Close to Margaret is Solomon, who is going to join me in moderating this session this evening. Solomon is the climate change lead at the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. And my name is Uchenna Achunine. I work also with Nigerian Conservation Foundation as the Director of Business Development and Communications. This side event is hosted by NCF in partnership with WWF and the Access Corporation. So I'm happy to welcome all of us to this session. I will start immediately with Martin. Saving nature through business partnerships seems to have been a successful model that has supported numerous nature-positive ambitions in Europe and the global north. So could you just share some of the BirdLife and RSPB experience of this model? Thank you.
I'll do my best, and thanks very much. So basically, I've been working within the BirdLife family for the past 18 years, 17 of which was with the UK partner, the RSPB, and then I moved across during the pandemic to work for BirdLife. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some stories and examples about where private sector partnerships have worked or not. And what I thought I'd do is I thought about this, and there's basically 5 categories of partnerships that we've been involved in over the years. And as you go up the sort of hierarchy, they get more and more impactful. And I'll just sort of give you a flavor of these. So there's the classic sponsorship partnership, which still exists. We often partner with whiskey production companies, so Famous Grouse Whiskey supporting peatland conservation through their sales, or Redbreast Whiskey supporting BirdLife's operations around the world. So those sponsorship opportunities still exist. And then the second one going up is transactional. Sometimes an NGO might have a real problem, and so might a company, and whether they can make a match. The best example I can think of is the RSPB was trying to essentially deliver a major managed realignment project on the east coast of England, but the ground was too low to allow the sea level to come in, so it needed to raise the ground level. How did it do that? By matching with Crossrail, which was delivering an enormous tunnel across London, had an enormous amount of spoil and aggregate, and it needed to go somewhere. So it went to Wallasey, it raised the land, and that led to the largest coastal habitat realignment project. So that's the second one, transactional. The third one is really advisory. So we use our expertise and our science to try and influence a range of sectors, whether it's farmers or renewable energy companies, to try and ensure that their commercial activities take place in harmony with the natural world. So really good wildlife-friendly farming and also deployment of energy, renewable energy projects in a way which don't cause harm to nature. And then we're sort of going up the scale, big strategic partnerships. And we often done that with the minerals industry, where we pretty much work inside the organization over the long term to try and ensure that they change their business behavior. We've done that with the likes of Cemex, with Heidelberg Materials, Rio Tinto, and most recently with a Belgian-based firm called Sibelco, who just this week have published their new biodiversity strategy to outline explicitly how they're going to put back more nature through all of their quarries and how they're going to report on that. And so we need those sort of companies, not just to get their own house in order, but also to advocate change. And Heidelberg Material, for example, were one of those companies calling for high environmental standards within the European Union, and even calling for a nature restoration law. So that's the fourth. And then the fifth one, which is the one I think we are all most excited by, is these big innovative investment projects. And we've started playing around with those in a big way. Those of you here earlier would have heard of RSPB's involvement in Gola Rainforest, in Sierra Leone and Liberia, but there are always also other initiatives that we're working on with Asian development banks. So I think they're the big five: sponsorship, transactional, advisory, big strategic ones, and then these innovative investment partnerships.
Thank you, Martin. Hello? Okay, good. Thank you, Martin, for that. That's really very clear, those exemplary case studies that you've shown to us over here. So I think I'm just going to go to Dr. Itua. My next question is just going to be, I think the first question to you really, there's been this saying that nature means business and business means nature. And that has been showcased in the way business, perform their activities. I just wanted you to reflect on how well businesses and private organizations in Africa has been able to showcase this in their practice.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Businesses in Africa, how they have been able to showcase this. Well, to an extent, I will say yes, they are learning to showcase this. Why would I say this? Because these are emerging issues. And generally, people are getting to understand that, or businesses are getting to understand that, look, they live on nature. They depend on nature. Their raw materials are from nature. But unfortunately, what had happened, they had abused this over the years. All of us are beginning to understand that, look, without nature, our businesses will not thrive. But to what degree have we actually mainstreamed all of this into our systems, into our business activities, into our decision making? I think we've not done so well. More especially since the African continent, for instance, for the private sector, it is understood that not less than 90 of what we have as businesses are SMEs. What do they really understand about this? Not so much. Are they in position to reflect all of this? They are. But do they know how to do it? No. So in other words, there is need for us to look at it from that perspective. How many large corporates do we have on the African continent? I don't think we have so many. Like I just said, not less than 90% are SMEs. So in other words, there is need for us to deliberately develop capacities among the SMEs so that they can take all of what we're saying into decision and continue or decide to repurpose or remodel their business strategies. If we're able to do this, I think we would have started doing something towards nature positive pathways.
Thank you, Dr. Tua. So I come to Dr. Noja. Currently, Africa has experienced a lot of environmental and economic shocks like climate change, biodiversity loss, and geopolitical challenges. Do you think that these challenges present investment opportunities to investors in Africa?
Absolutely, it does. First of all, before I continue with my point, I want to point out something straight to investors, would-be investors and private sector, and whoever is going to mobilize funds for any project that has to do with biodiversity conservation and nature protection. You are not doing anybody a favor by investing. We must understand that, because we are all in this together. You are not giving money so that you will help those people and as if, oh, it's a kind of, oh, you are doing philanthropy and okay, we are the givers of the money, you are going to use the money, therefore we are better off than you. No, we are in all these things together. So we that are on the ground implementing whatever strategy we need to implement to make sure that nature continues to play the role it's supposed to play to keep all of us safe and to keep all of us to be thriving. And you who is providing the money, it's a mutual beneficial relationship. So having put that on the table, there are different opportunities in Africa that provides opportunity for us, for investors, and especially from the private sector. And that is where the innovative financing comes in. Even when we talk, I'll look at it probably from 2 or 3 different angles. We talk about conservation, real conservation actions on the ground. Even the modification of human behavior is an investment opportunity, and then the development or the sustenance of people's livelihood. So if I look at it from these 3 different angles, number 1, when you talk about real conservation issues on the ground, we have a lot of degraded landscape. And this degraded landscape have the opportunity for regeneration. And if we have opportunities for regeneration, definitely we have to make some investment in that to be able to provide some of those landscape restoration, for instance, growing seedlings and so on. And this will be tied closely to the livelihoods of the communities that are living around these areas. Because if the place have been degraded and you want to restore, when you're talking about restoration, that means you want to bring back what was there. And this time around, it gives us an opportunity to be able to work with the locals, because you want to also improve their livelihoods. So you are restoring whatever was there that will help them to continue to live their lives the way they should. So I've looked at 2 different areas. And then the third area is about livelihood, the behavioral change. Because there's a need for us to continue to change behaviors that will not be detrimental to environmental conservation in the vicinity we find ourselves. Because over time, humans, we have this mindset that whatever we are doing nature a favor. When I go out there to talk to people, I tell them that when we talk about nature conservation and environmental conservation, we are not actually talking about environmental conservation or nature conservation. Nature will always take care of itself. Nature don't need us. So when we talk about environmental and nature conservation, we're actually talking about human conservation. Because if we allow nature to take care of itself, nature will take care of itself at our detriment. So there's a need for us to invest in nature so that nature will continue to play its role as our life support system, so that whatever we do, both as business owners and as conservation practitioners on the ground, will all thrive and leave a more healthy environment for the future generation. So there are opportunities in Africa for investment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I come to Ndekwa. Yeah, so you are doing, currently you're doing a study on biodiversity on investment, a doctoral study, a PhD program on that. So from your doctoral studies on biodiversity and investment, do you think youth-led nature positive ambitions are receiving enough financial support from corporate organizations, especially in the African region?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. We are starting to see a lot of interest, and as my colleagues have indicated, this is an emerging issue. The interrelatedness between business and conservation and nature is something that has been there, but we are slowly starting to see people take it seriously in terms of businesses coming to understand what it really means for them. And it also then goes that we are not seeing a lot of investment coming into youth-driven, nature-friendly businesses. And mainly, we are seeing this is coming about because of 3 major things. One is around value, which we have spoken about. We are still struggling to put across the value proposition to businesses in a manner that they can easily understand and buy into. So most of the young people still do not know how to package the value proposition to the private sector to be able to draw in the financing that they need. The other thing that we are observing is the scale. There is capital out there that is ready and willing to invest in nature positive businesses and investments, but most of the youth led initiatives are still small, and sometimes they struggle to show the proof of concept to scale. So that scares away most of the investors. So there's still a lot of capacity building and support that needs to go to youth-led initiatives so that they are able to, first of all, the investment. For you to be able to show the proof of concept, there has to be some form of investment. So we need some support from the private sector, first of all, to be able to invest in the youth to allow them the opportunity to show the scalability of the businesses that they are running. The other component that is coming out, which of course we cannot avoid, is the risky nature of some of these businesses. They're really prone to both economic and natural shocks. So most of the times the investors, as they're still learning the environment and the space, most of them will tend to shy away from some of these investments. So risk, scale, and value.
Thank you so much for that exposition. So I think I'll quickly go to Margaret. And today being the Finance Day in COP, it's a special day because finance is very key for you to do anything with regards to nature, for you to protect nature, for you to ensure that nature become resilient, for you to ensure that nature becomes the tool for solving climate change. And that's really critical. However, in the last couple of days, there's been a lot of discussions around mobilizing resources for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We're talking in terms of about $200 million annually, if I'm not mistaken. And but you work as a finance practice leader with WWF, and you've seen a lot of models that have worked where you work. Will you like to just share some of these few examples, and also tell us how this could be replicated in Africa to sustain nature and to achieve the post-2020 GBF that is soon to be agreed in this conference?
Great, thanks very much, Solomon, for the question. And thanks, Uchenna, for asking me to join you. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here and hear the great examples. I was reflecting as you were all talking that, you know, we need capacity building everywhere, and there is also capacity everywhere. There's no shortage of need in any part of the world, or of innovation in any part of the world. And I think in particular, there's been a lot of innovation on the continent. You've made a lot of examples, but I reflect back on when the Sustainable Development Goals were first agreed and the financing for development framework was put together. That was so warmly, fully, completely embraced. And I think there's been a lot of innovation, sometimes more in Africa than in other places, around how you get innovative finance to the SDGs. This is just one more part of the SDG wheel. And we have as much to learn from all of these examples in other parts of the world as there are examples to bring. I want to highlight, I want to add to Martin's one more level of partnership to get to the question of some of the conversations around resource mobilization and aligning finance that have been happening over the course of the week for sure. And today I tend to spend most of my time in the events, not in the negotiations, but listening to what financial institutions are saying. And there are a lot of them here this week talking about the desire to do exactly what you mentioned in Dekwa, which is find a way to recognize the value of nature, not place a value on nature, but finally recognize the value of nature because we're all a part of nature, and because We know that the investment in nature is not philanthropy, but actually it supports our economies and it supports ourselves. So to add one more level of partners to yours is the opportunity to really, at a global level, reset these signals. And I think a lot of the examples that we've had are examples of innovation that really have been forced into being because the policy signals, because the economic signals are sending money in the wrong direction. So we've been really applying every last brain cell to try to figure out how we solve what is effectively a big market problem. It's a big opportunity to discuss how you at a much bigger level start to value nature in a way that brings finance not for extraction and not just for restoration after you've extracted, but to recognize the value of intact nature. I think that's really the challenge we're all trying to get after, and this discussion of alignment now has a whole set of private financial institutions also asking the same question that all of us have been trying to answer with the fantastic innovation that's been happening on the ground at a bigger scale. One specific, sorry to finally answer your question, Solomon, one specific thing that we've seen work that we think is also replicable, we have a partnership with the Dutch Fund for, the FMO, the Dutch Development Agency. It's called the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. It's a blended finance facility which provides debt, grant, and equity investment in small investments in nature and climate solutions with a nature benefit on the ground. That's very difficult work to do. I think you've got plenty of examples of how hard that is. And trying to first identify what those potential investments are. So WWF and SMV, which is a Dutch development agency, are partnered in this, working to try to identify on the ground or in the water, as the case may be, what the potential investments may be, and then getting it to the bankers, getting it to the investors. So it's a 160 million euro fund with grant, debt, and equity. FMO is in with equity, debt, and then they provide the grant facility. And Climate Fund Managers, a private fund manager, also comes in with equity. So you get that growth capital and not just debt. But it's these kinds of new partnerships, like I've been calling extreme partnering, which really is going to find us these new solutions to add one more layer to Martin's original. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Margaret. That's when I hear 160 million euros, it's a lot of money, and I've just been an advocate of how is it going to get to...
We need 5 of those.
5
by
of
the way.
those.
We need more of those facilities. It needs to be replicated.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think I will go to the second questions for Martin. And it's just a build-up on the first question. And your answers on what you share about those kind of models that you shared. And I just wanted to ask that, how do you think this could be replicated in Africa? Supporting the nature positive initiatives that we want to drive, than we want to see in the next, by 2030. How do we replicate all of these things to make it work, considering the African, I wouldn't say issue, but the African perspective and what the issues are.
Peculiarity.
And the peculiarity, yeah, that's the word. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, the first thing I'll say is, if anyone's been spending any time here over the last few days, they'll know there's unbelievable innovation and brilliant projects all around the world. And one of our challenges actually is to just extract the best and learn. So over there yesterday, we had the 10 world flagship restoration projects announced. We should be interrogating them, and what did we learn? But I will answer your question just from personal experience, actually, because I think that in my experience working with the private sector, you know, you get huge benefit, but there are some bear traps. And so I think going into these things with your eyes wide open is really, really important. And what's really important, I think, and from the outset, is commitment, trust, and then establish these projects with really good governance and making sure that each side have the capability and commitment to deliver. If I think about, you know, the amazing work that our partners in Sierra Leone and Liberia have done with Gola Rainforest, for example, that's a 30-year commitment, working with the local communities, working with the governments, trying to get now carbon finance, supporting people with local livelihoods. We're learning as we go. If I think about what we've done with Heidelberg Materials in terms of trying to attract, do conservation projects to restore their quarries on the ground, it's trying to match the quarries to the local actors who actually know about how to restore nature, but they've got to be comfortable with that. And so the due diligence that any, let's call it, beneficiary partner does over the private sector to make sure you're comfortable to work with that company is absolutely vital. But in the end, I'll just repeat what other people have said really about how do we deploy the capacity, grow the capacity, both from the bottom up, but also in terms of the knowledge amongst these brilliant, complicated brains working in finance, so they help understand our world a bit about biodiversity. And somehow, we've got to come together and meet in the middle, because we need to transform the economy, and we need to transform it fast.
Thank you. So I come to Dr. Itua. Do you think that the IGOs and the Pan-African institutions and development agencies in Africa are doing enough to ramp up finance for nature-positive ambitions in the African region?
Thank you very much. And interestingly, he just talked about what is happening in Sierra Leone and elsewhere. And then to what Margaret has talked about earlier. Again, the use of the word enough. What is actually enough? Nothing is ever enough as far as we're concerned as humans. So there's need to do more. On the ground, yes, various activities are happening. We can scale this up. One of the ones I can readily put my finger on is mainstreaming natural capital in Africa Development Finance, supported by an initiative between Africa Development Bank and then the Green Growth Knowledge Partnership. It's deliberately laying a foundation on how natural capital can be mainstreamed in DFIs, especially looking at mega projects. So in other words, yes, activities are happening. And I think one of the things they're even looking at is how they can use that project to convey what others are doing. In other words, bring them to the fold, the MDBs, and see how all of them can have a common opinion on how projects could be supported using the natural capital approach. So something is happening. But can we scale that up? Yes, we can. I think if we do that, it will really support the African continent. But again, like I've said earlier, if we are taking it from the dimension of the SMEs, what do we need to do? The DFIs. One of the things that I've even seen now is that, again, let me just take it from the angle of African Development Bank, is wanting to deliberately create that opportunity for SMEs. And so, if all of them can take a cue from that, I think we'll be able to scale up the trajectory in this manner. Okay, so I heard you before said that we do not really have lots of these development agencies and big multilaterals and all of that in Africa. But the few that we have, because I just hear you mention African Development Bank, which others do we have? Do they have the kind of passion and interest that AFDB has in nature conservation and biodiversity conservation? So how do we try to woo them to get interest in nature conservation? The others, I know that it's not just AFDB, there are others. Margaret is from WWF. Let me just give that as an example. And you have others as well. That can be Bed of Life, or rather Bed Life. They've been there over the years, supporting the African continent. But beyond looking at the bigger corporations, they are supportive of the SMEs as well. So in other words, you have a number of them. All we need to do, one of the things I would suggest is mapping.
I'm thinking of some Pan-African institutions.
Well, you also have, for instance, Nezim Bank that is trying to come into Africa Import and Export Bank, Afrizim Bank, that is trying to deliberately come into this space as well. We can encourage that. And then I'll give you another example. The Development Bank of Nigeria is also coming into this space. You have the Development Bank of South Africa is also doing something. And then Zimbabwe as well. You have a whole lot of them on the African continent that are deliberately wanting to do something towards this path that all of us are walking. So we have them. But then, is it possible for us to actually map them so that we know who is doing what?
Exactly.
So that they don't work in that in silos. If we're able to identify that and then bring them together, they can leverage on what each one is doing. So it's possible.
Thank you very much, Dr. Itua. And my next question goes to Indekwa. It's just building on you've done quite a lot of research work on looking at youth-led initiatives and the barrier they face in terms of attracting investments and finance. And I just want us to look a bit beyond all of those barriers they face and look at the end of the day, those ones that are able to overcome those barriers and that can be recommended to corporate organizations in Africa. Do you like to share examples of those youth-led initiatives on nature positive pathway for us here, please? Do you get my question?
Yes, I did get your question. There are a lot of initiatives that the youth are currently carrying out on the continent. But before I even get to that, just to add on what Dr. Itua said and what Martin said earlier, perhaps this is something that is going to come up in the next couple of months, but the African continent is actually slowly and steadily working towards establishing a sustainable financing mechanism. And this is one that looks at it's a hybrid mechanism, one that is solely driven by the protected area directors on the continent. And what pushed them towards taking this decision was the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know what happened when COVID struck, and a lot of restrictions. They did not have enough financing to run their operational activities. Finances had to be repurposed, and so they came together across the continent. They do meet quarterly, and they felt, no, we need to think beyond the government support that we are getting. How can we tap into the private sector? And so they're slowly working through establishing a mechanism that could support the continent's ecosystem of protected and conserved areas. So that's one thing that they're trying to replicate across the continent. So back to what we are discussing around youth initiatives. There are a lot of youth initiatives, and many of them, naturally, because of where we are on the continent, we are seeing a lot of potential within the agricultural sector. And within the agricultural sector, the challenge that we are seeing is that most of these youth do not understand how to move up the value chain. And there are numerous examples that I could give, but maybe one example that I could give is in Kenya, where we have one youth who identified a challenge within the community, and for him the question was, how do I solve this challenge but also try and bring the other people along? How do I take care of the farmers who are struggling to find market for their produce? So what he did was to try and establish a platform that helps these farmers to navigate the market, to identify what the prices are at what point. They're trying to work with research companies in the country to identify, for instance, the soil types where the farmers are doing their agriculture, so that they can even advise them on what inputs to use. And then instead of providing cash to these farmers, what they do is partner with private company to provide the inputs. So a lot of this is actually in the agricultural sector by default in terms of where we are. And what they're trying to do is to think through how to move up the value chain. I have tomatoes. How can I change this into paste that will last longer? I have there is a drought coming. We know the cycles. I am a livestock farmer. How can I work with the meat commission so that they buy my produce way in advance so that I do not suffer the issues associated with drought, for instance. So a lot of these are in the agricultural sector across the continent. I would be happy to provide a list of what some of those specific businesses are.
Okay, so before I turn to the audience for some question, I would like to ask Dr. Noja one more question. So all the discussion that we've been having is trying to scale support for nature positive ambitions. Everything is for us to achieve nature positive status. So let's say that businesses are interested in investing in some initiatives. So how do we create nature positive businesses that would help scale positive impact that will help reverse the nature decline in Africa?
Okay, so I'm going to build up from my previous point and give specific examples. I talked about direct actions on the ground restoration in terms of restoration. I talked about behavioral change, and I talked about livelihood improvement. So I'm going to give examples of each of them. So in 2016-2017, the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, we saw that the Nigerian's forest landscapes is highly degraded because we've lost over from independence to that period, we've lost over 90-95% of our forest cover, and there was a need to build that up. And we know with the attendant effect that can bring to us, both in terms of livelihood and in terms of even the environmental disasters that normally go with such. We are seeing the effect of that in terms of flooding and so on. So we launched a very big, what we call an ambitious project, what we call the Green Recovery Nigeria, where we hope to restore Nigeria's forest cover back to at least 25% of our forest cover. So we've started that. So that is an opportunity of investment that will eventually translate into a nature positive scenario that we are driving at. So at the stage where we talk about, and why I say is an avenue for investment, because you need funds to be able to drive this. And my other 2 points are closely linked to it. The Green Recovery Nigeria. Now, we've mapped out some landscapes that are degraded, working very closely with communities. And we've had some investments that are already driving towards that. So far, we planted about between 1.7 and 2 million tree seedlings. And you can go to the places where these things have been done, and you see that they are actually, we could see the effort that is going on. And we've had some investment from Afri 100 and so on, and some corporate organizations also are already putting money inside. So it's an ambitious project, which NCF on our own, we know that we will not be able to accomplish it on our own. So we want to galvanize as much effort as possible so that everybody who is doing whatever in terms of habitat restoration, we can capture all of that and see where we are at every time that we are looking at the scale. We hope to do this in 30 years, and it's an opportunity for us to move forward. Now, closely linked to that about behavioral change and where the investment comes in is in terms of awareness. You see, we need to deliberately change our messaging. And that is why I was using some particular words so that people will not think that they are doing anybody a favor by investing in nature conservation. I really want to drive that in so that everybody will be aware that we are all into this together. That may not be your core responsibility in going to the ground and ensuring that nature is conserved. the people who are their core responsibility, you who is providing funds for them is not doing them a favor to do their work. They are just doing all of us a favor. We are mutually into this. So there's a need for behavioral change, and that is that's a track for investment, because we need to have things like programs that are geared towards changing behavior, programs that are geared towards messaging, to ensure that people are aware of it, so that everybody will take responsibility, because we are all involved in this. If we, for instance, in Nigeria, we're trying to change behavior so that people will take advantage of every occasion, for instance, birthdays, anniversaries, what are you doing for nature? Instead of going and blowing your money in big parties and so on, what can you do for nature? And even appreciation of nature. She talked about the investment in national parks or in protected areas. When people visit those areas, they are providing funds that will continue to be kind of recycled into protecting these areas. So that is a track for investment. Now the third track is about livelihood. Closely linked to habitat restoration is about livelihood as well. And one of the areas which I know that Kenya and other countries are already investing and enjoying is the fact that you want to change the farmers and the local communities, their livelihood, in terms of you want to empower them. The degraded landscape around them, their livelihoods depend on this. So they will do whatever it is possible for them to be able to bring back what they have. For instance, we have a program where we're trying to deliberately raise seedlings that have direct impact on economic seedlings. We have seedlings like shea butter that we're trying to bring. We have something that we call bush mango, so that by the time they own this thing, they are able to know that in the next 2, 3, 5 years, they will have harvest from it, and it's going to be sustainable, instead of just cutting it down and eating it today and forgetting about tomorrow. So by empowering them, it helps them to be able to do that, and they will own the process. And once they own the process, then they have some incentive. So the area of investment that I want to talk about is, can we have, just like it's happening somewhere, can we have people being paid upfront to take care of the trees? Because they cut down some of those trees because they want to take care of their family. But if they know that their livelihood is assured, they will protect it. Introducing agroecology, agroforestry into whatever we are doing. That is the track for investment as well. So those are the 3 areas that are opportunities for investment, with collaboration with corporate organizations, private individuals, and private sector, so that we will be able to all come together and protect nature. So that as I end my message, nature will protect us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noja. That's a very wonderful exposition around those 3 thematic areas. The fact that there needs to be livelihood, behavioral change, and the pathway to delivering nature conservation. So I think I just wanted Margaret to give a reflection on what is happening here with regards to finance, and if we are really going to, if the post-2020 GBF is not going to be a failure in terms of implementation with regards to resource mobilization. What do you see happen in the next few days with regards to finance? And do you think it will be a success, or how do you see the resource mobilization thing go, with the conversation goes with the post-2020 GBF negotiations?
Thanks for that. That's not a small question, of course. One thing I would say is we clearly need to close the financing gap in biodiversity, which is about $700 billion a year. And there are a variety of ways to close that gap. And we need to apply every single one of them to close that gap. That includes more grant assistance. That includes repurposing harmful subsidies to finance into the transition, to support the transition, to eliminate those harmful subsidies as harmful subsidies and transition. We need to increase the leverage of private sector, so get more blending instruments, using that very scarce grant funds to go farther, like this Dutch Fund for Climate and Development model. We need all of those tools. Domestic resource mobilization is a great example coming here, because you know the local challenges far better than anyone else does. The local solutions can also be far more effective than any of the others. So all of those tools need to be mobilized. Otherwise, we're not going to fill the gap. That global biodiversity framework needs to have high ambition, and you can't deliver that ambition without the finance. And without the ambition, the finance won't come. You can't do this independently.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So we'll turn to the audience. Anybody has any question for the panel? For the panelists? You have a question? You want to make a contribution? Okay.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question per se. I'm a staff of National Park Service. I'm in Nigeria. And I want to lay credence to what Dr. Noja has said. The federal government of Nigeria is planning to privatize, partial commercialization of 3 of the 7 national parks we have in the country. Nigeria has 7 national parks already existing, while 10 are in transition. So this is an opportunity for private investors to come and intervene and invest. We have some NGO like the Africa Nature Investor, ANI, that has come in full. And today, the park that used to experience challenges years, today the park is experiencing calmness. And at the end, I believe they have invested a lot by recruiting youth from the community, engaging the local contractors, and I believe in a few years' time, I believe they will recoup a lot of funds they have invested. So I'm using this opportunity to call for investors to come in. I can assure you that surely you will reap your sowing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sure we heard him that we have very low-hanging fruit kind of investment in the national parks in Nigeria. So I'm happy that these kind of things are coming up so that people get to know that there are opportunities for investment in places that we do not even think about. I don't know if anybody has another question from the audience.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm called Norbert Sonne. I'm the country director for African Wildlife Foundation, Cameroon office. So I really appreciate your intervention, and I would like just to make a contribution. From my experience, I wish to suggest that we should also support our government in this shift of how do we diverse the model of our protected area management. Like for the 60+ year, it has been much more like government center. And I think most of the people who are ready to put money into are feeling tired. Like, we have been putting money for 30, 60 years. What is wrong? And that came in an issue of governance, efficiency, and some people think that, can we bring a private sector into the business? Not as a source of funding, but also as an actor of implementation. How do we design a model where in a protected area, we can have a joint venture between the government, the private sector, and maybe like an NGO which has expertise. I think some private sector are willing to put money, but at the same time, they want to have a certain I don't want to say a control, but I mean they want to have something to say, not just coming and putting $1 million, $2 million and then just waiting for the technical and the financial report. I think we have to be courageous enough to move and and shift to something where government, they have to concede some of, if I want to say, power or authority or control. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other question from the audience? Okay, so I think we would want to take final comments from the panelists. But before then, I wanted to ask Dr. Ito a question. So Dr. Noja talked about NCF projects that are currently running, and these projects provide very good investment opportunities for corporate organizations. And quite frankly, some corporate organizations are taking advantage of that. Some financial institutions like Stanbic IBTC, Access Bank that is partnering with us to host this side event. So my question to you, sir, is how can private businesses, corporate organizations in Africa, how can they, how can we encourage them to key into, what word do you have for them, to key into this kind of opportunities, take advantage of this? And like Dr. No just said repeatedly, they're not doing this for me, they're not doing it for you, they're doing it for nature. That, in fact, I call it a selfish thing to do and a moral thing to do. So what word do you have for private businesses in Africa to look into? It's not just NCF. I'm sure other organizations across Africa have this kind of opportunity that they can take advantage of to be part of nature conservation and biodiversity conservation.
Thank you very much. Like I said earlier, first and foremost, they need to look at their strategy all over again.
Yes, in policy framing and all of those.
Yes, they need to look at that. But interestingly, one of the things that we're talking about here is Target 15. That tend to focus on how business can mandatorily assess and report all their impact and dependencies. So in other words, arising from here, and then indeed before, can businesses, before the negotiations are concluded, reinforce on the minds of their negotiators that, look, businesses are looking forward to see how they can indeed report mandatorily on these issues. Before now, a number of them are already reporting voluntarily. But on the African continent, we don't have regulations that tend to reinforce or enforce all of this. We don't. And some of the big corporates are already reporting voluntarily. But how can they be made to report mandatorily? And I think that is one of the key achievements we would have gone away with if we conclude on that very point. And then going back, even whether it is accepted or not, can we learn from what would have been discussed? One other thing that I have even seen, Business for Nature and Capitals Coalition have been there trying to support businesses on how they can indeed walk that path. A number of them have signed on to say mandatorily, we want to report. Even if it's not accepted, it is a useful learning point for businesses coming out from here to say, look, for us to try, for our businesses to thrive from that positive nature angle, we need to ensure that our strategies are given attention all over again, so that we all move towards ensuring that, like he said earlier, we benefit from nature, and we want nature to continue to benefit our businesses. So in other words, businesses will want to reach out and see what is the business case for us? What do you want to take away from this? I'll give you an example. We're even doing a feasibility study for a number of the organizations in Nigeria. And what are they looking at? Tree planting. How can they plant trees? Their businesses have nothing to do with tree planting. But they are deliberately now coming into the pathway So in other words, I think businesses need to reach out. And you also need to reach out to businesses so that we work pari passu with one another and then achieve that positive stance that all of us want to gain. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our time is gone. I would have loved for each of us to give 30 seconds final comment, but I think that Dr. Itua's speech is a good way to end it. So I want to thank every one of us here for taking our time to join us and for your contributions, and to our high-profile, I call them high-profile panel. Thank you for joining us. And I'm happy that all of you are doing one thing or the other in these negotiations going on. So Dr. Ito has given us something to make sure that Target 15 is concluded very well, and some mandatory input for businesses as we go into to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Thank you for joining us, and bye.